Hello there guys, what is going on? SonOfChelsea back here again for another video. Champions League draw reaction. The group stage draw has just taken place, even though it takes about 5 hours to complete. We finally got there, and instant reaction to it. I think you've got to be happy and content. I'm sure Thomas Tuchel somewhere watching that draw is content with it, considering some of the other English teams, what they got being in pot 2, some of the teams we avoided. I think it's a nice blend of a draw. You have some old faces from AC Milan, a classic kind of Champions League tie at the San Siro. But as well, we've got some new competition and new teams that we haven't faced before in competitive action in Salzburg and Zagreb. And I think when I balance it out, and I was doing today for Football London, kind of looking at our Premier League fixture schedule around these group games, because it's going to be so congested, it's going to be a bit mad. I think out of the competition we could have got, it's the Champions League, and I think Salzburg, particularly Salzburg, Milan, obviously it's going to be tricky. But these are both games I think Chelsea, and especially Zagreb, you expect Chelsea are going to be competing with Milan for the top spot. And as I say, compared to Liverpool, who potentially got a tougher draw than Chelsea. I mean, just looking here, Bayern, Barca, Inter. I mean, that is probably the group of death. Tottenham got an alright draw. Man City, I think, got a tougher draw with Sevilla and Dortmund and Copenhagen, especially Sevilla and Dortmund. I mean, two very experienced Champions League sides. PSG, Juve, Benfica. I mean, they were tough from those first 3 pots, though there were tougher combinations for Chelsea to face. Expected narrative, obviously, you're looking at AC Milan, Olivier Giroud and Fikayo Tomori returning to the bridge, potentially as well Timothy Bakayoko will be back at the bridge, but mainly those first two, Fikayo and Olivier Giroud, I'm sure will get both good receptions. And then on the transfer front, a player we have been speaking about in recent days, Rafa Leao. Obviously, apparently Chelsea having interest in the forward. He is likely to play against Chelsea, and we're talking about the Serie A winners last year. There's a reason they were in pot 1. So I expect it to be a difficult game against a young team, an impressive team who may have lost some players, but still have enough quality to challenge Chelsea. And if you think back 12 months when the last draw was made for the group stage, we had Juve, we had Malmo, and we had Zenit St. Petersburg at the time. I think I was in sort of a similar mindset. I thought Chelsea should have got top, and we didn't. In the end, that didn't really cost us in the last 16 draw, because we got Lille and we got to the quarter-final. But still, for Chelsea, getting top of this group, I think it is realistic. And as well, some nice ties within there. And I think for both, especially Salzburg and Milan, the San Siro, whenever it takes place, of course, we have to find out sort of the ranking of these games, because I think that I'd want Milan in one of the opening 2 games like we had Juve last year, because just in terms of looking at the Premier League and the games in and around them, which I always find quite interesting, it's mostly London based. Chelsea pretty much stay in London for the first couple of weeks of the Champions League in and around these games. I think we play away to Fulham, and we've got a couple of home games, one of which is against Liverpool. I think West Ham precedes the first group game, so want to go over there. I think the second batch of games aren't that bad. Again, I think we maybe got a couple games in London, Crystal Palace, Wolves. It's the last batch of games where the travelling isn't as bad, but we start to face some really tough teams in the Premier League, and obviously dependent on what's going on with the group. Let me know your opinions. Obviously at this stage, all we're thinking about is Saturday, right, against Leicester and getting back to winning ways. But I like this group. And in terms of the Champions League, in terms of like my season predictions, I think once again, the last day is kind of where I'm looking. I think that's kind of mandatory for Chelsea now. Just getting past that last 16, kind of consistently getting to that latter stage of the Champions League where you're in serious contention. I think if you get to the semi-final, I always think that's a decent season in the Champions League because of the level of competition. I did feel, obviously, there were alternative draws. I think a lot of us have been using that simulator over the past day to kind of think about certain draws we could have got. I mean, Lukaku, there could have been a return for him. Bayer Leverkusen, because Callum Hudson-Odoi could be going on loan to them. He's got a group where, if he does, of course, that deal still needs to be finalised. But Porto, Atletico and Club Brugge. Antonio Rudiger could have returned to the bridge with Real Madrid and Eden Hazard too. We couldn't have got Andreas Christensen and, of course, all the players at Barcelona because they were in the same pot as us. And Rangers, I personally would have liked Rangers in our group, to be honest. I think it would have been quite fun. I don't think too many people would disagree with me and say this is one of the better draws Chelsea could have got. I think that Chelsea and Spurs probably got the better hand in the group stage from the English Premier League teams this year than Liverpool and Man City, who look to have maybe more trickier ties. Of course, once we get into the serious stuff, that may change, and we know of Chelsea, as we did with last year, you can't take these things for granted. But I like the draw. I think it's going to be a pretty fun one. I did just want to touch on a couple of things before we do wrap up today. Some of the news stuff today that happened. Ben Jacobs tweeting earlier today about Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, how that deal looks to be pretty close. There are even some suggestions he was getting onto a plane. He put a cryptic Insta post, as I think Aubameyang tends to do on his socials. I think he was in Paris, the reasoning for that, but it does look like this deal now is pretty close to being done. And I've got a piece for Football London that's going out tomorrow morning, actually, about Aubameyang, and I'm not going to hide what's in it. It's effectively looking at Thomas Tuchel, and funny enough, I referenced Olivier Giroud before knowing we were going to get him in the draw, in terms of looking at the way that worked when we bought him. It's a now striker. That's what it is with Aubameyang, and it has to work. It really does, not only for Chelsea's sake, I think for Tuchel's sake as well, in terms of the type of character Aubameyang is, the question marks over his character, the way it went wrong at Arsenal. Can that previous good working relationship between Tuchel and Aubameyang kind of be rekindled and kind of really impact Chelsea in a positive way? We saw Aubameyang finish a nice goal in a friendly against Man City last night. So we'll see how that one plays out, if it will be confirmed in the next 24 to 48 hours, and see if Aubameyang returns to the Premier League as a Chelsea player. It's probably going to annoy some Arsenal fans, and if he does well, it's going to annoy them even more. So fingers crossed that happens. And I do want to speak about, I referenced him in a draw, because if he does go to the Bundesliga with Bayer Leverkusen, Callum Hudson-Odoi, I wrote about him today. Please go and check out the piece. Kevin Hatchard, who's a Bundesliga expert and commentator, was giving some quotes from the Bayer Leverkusen side, and a good friend of the channel and podcast guest on London is Blue Pod and another podcast as well, Ollie Glanville. I'm sure some of you guys know him or follow him. If you don't, please go and follow him. Great guy and has great insights about Chelsea. Got quotes sort of on the Chelsea side around Callum. We've been having a similar conversation around Callum Hudson-Odoi, I think, for a very long time now, and I think it's just of relief to me that, at least for his sake, there's going to be a new point to be made around him. There's going to be a new chapter. There's going to be something fresh around Callum Hudson-Odoi in his career, because it feels like we've been going in circles. With the odd kind of flash that maybe something more could happen with him at Chelsea, I do wonder if this is the end for Callum Hudson-Odoi at Chelsea. That sounds pretty dramatic, because it is only a loan, but there are suggestions of an option to buy being in there. I don't think at the moment, or at least in recent reports, that hasn't been the case, but it could be in there. Or at the very least, him going over to the Bundesliga, where he's had so much interest in his career, particularly from Bayern Munich. If he does really well, you do wonder, if we get to next year, his contract would be down to 1 year then. Would Bayern come calling again, and would that be the moment Chelsea sell to him? I mean, some people do firmly believe, and I don't fully reject this idea because of what's happened with Callum since and his development or lack of it. Would it have been better for Chelsea to sell Callum when they got one of those two offers in 2019 and 2020 from Bayern Munich? Particularly the second one, I think, right at the end of the 2020 summer transfer window, where apparently it was a massive fee. I think it was around 70 million, and of course, with what's gone on since, you don't suspect anyone will be offering that for him right now. But I just hope for Callum it's a good loan move. I hope he gets the minutes he desires in a league that I think is very conducive to a type of attacker he is. Hopefully he gets the space, and with Diaby and some of the other attackers, Florian Wirtz, there are some exciting players at Leverkusen, even though they've had a difficult start to the season. If they can get back on track, if he can play in the Champions League, if he can impress, could he return to Chelsea? I do have my doubts around that, to be honest, in terms of the way Tuchel maybe views him. But let me know your opinions. Do you think that's a good loan move for Callum Hudson-Odoi? But on the group stage, I want to know your opinions on it as well. We got there in the end. Chelsea, I think, out of the English teams, should be quite happy. And I think there are some exciting draws in there. Zagreb is a little bit more of a trek, but in terms of distances, it's not the worst with Milan and Salzburg as well. And I think there should be some fun, interesting games in there with some good players on show, and hopefully Chelsea can top their group and try and make another challenge under Thomas Tuchel for the European Cup. So let me know your opinions. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, notification bell, so you don't miss any of the uploads on the channel. I'm going to have my news video tomorrow previewing the Leicester game and all of that good stuff. And I will see you again very soon. Also follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea. Have a good evening.